Part 23. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Jong Word. Chapter 221. Chapter 221, You scream, even if your throat is broken by screaming, no one will come to save you. Sunian was also surprised when he saw Lan Min. After all, Lee Baiken has been causing a lot of trouble here in the past few days. How did this guy get in? Is this the heroine's ability? And Sunian had no doubt that Lee Baiken let it in intentionally. After all, Lan Min's eyes are almost on fire at this moment. According to Lee Baiken's licking settings, how could Lan Min lose such a temper when his physical condition is so low? Coming for you, Sunian repeated 3 words lightly. Yes, everything is directed at me. It is impossible for me to look at Baiken and be threatened by you because of me, and then force him to do something he is unhappy with. While Lan Zhen was talking, Sunian stood up and said, Come for you, then Lan Zhen, tell me, if I come for you, what can I get? Sunian looked at Lan Min at this moment. Why did she feel that this woman almost had the words I knew you are such a woman clearly written on her face? Lan Zhen, there is something wrong with your brain. Don't think of everyone as having a brain problem. Come to you can bring me that kind of happiness, be it or money. Lan Min's eyes couldn't help but widen. She really didn't expect it. Sunian actually said that. At this time, Sunian had a bold idea. You must know that if the male protagonist, a vicious male protagonist, teases the female protagonist, then the male protagonist will definitely fall from the sky and save the beauty. So what will be the consequences if she flirts with the heroine? I'm really a little excited when I think about it. Lan Min's face turned red from suppressing it, and he finally choked out, You are shameless. And Sunian's novels over the years were not in vain. He immediately acted like the male protagonist to the female protagonist described in ordinary novels, and then pinched her chin, Shameless, haha, am I shameless? You are just providing your normal demands. If you can achieve the same effect as Baiken, then I can let Baiken go. These words made Lan Min's body begin to tremble involuntarily. What does Sunian want to do? Before Lan Min came to Sunian, he thought about many possibilities and how to reject Sunian. But she never thought that Sunian would be like this. Sunian, what do you want to do? Don't mess around. The corners of Sunian's mouth rose unconsciously, and then he approached Lan Min and whispered, You scream, even if your throat is broken by screaming, no one will come to save you, Lan Min, although we are all women, if you really want to do something, you can do a lot of things. When Sunian finished speaking, seeing Lan Min's face pale and trembling all over, she wanted to laugh out loud. It feels really good to be a bad guy, especially a bad guy who is unscrupulous. Just at this time, the door was kicked open with a bang. Although Sunian didn't plan to do anything, this was still a bit disappointing. Sunian, what are you doing? Lee Baiken gritted his teeth. Lan Min's eyes suddenly lit up. Sunian didn't need to look to know that Lee Baiken's face must be full of anger, and even his eyes could burst into flames. That's right, Sunian guessed it right. But Lee Baiken was more serious than she guessed. Now Lee Baiken really feels like his whole body is about to burst into flames. You have to know how worried he was about Sunian when he knew that Lan Ren came to see Sunian, but he kicked the door open. I actually saw it. Sunian hooked Lan Min's chin with an expression on his face, while his eyes were still rolling. Damn it! What does this woman want to do? End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Jong Word. Chapter 222. Chapter 222 Lee Baiken, then just go and die. Lee Baiken quickly walked up to the two women and pulled Sunian over. Lee Baiken is so possessive of Lan Min? I just teased Lan Min, that's all. Lee Baiken. What is going on in this woman's mind? Baiken, I know that you have been threatened by this woman these days, forcing you to do things you don't want to do. If this is the case, then I would rather die. You must know that Lee Baiken was already very angry, so when he heard this, he said directly, then just go and die. After Lee Baiken finished speaking, the air became thinner. The faces of the three people were all shocked. Lanmin and Sunian were confused because Lee Baiken actually said such things. And Lee Baiken found that after he said these words to Lanmin, the so-called heroine, he didn't feel the power of that plot. However, when he came back to his senses, Lee Baiken still pulled Sunian towards him. Baiken, how can you say that? Something happened. Lanmin came back to his senses and said with disbelief. Lee Baiken didn't even look at Lanmin. After all, if he shows a little bit of intimacy with Lanmin now, then this woman will definitely think too much. Nothing happened, I just figured it out. What does it mean to have figured it out? What have you figured out? I have given you the opportunity to choose me, but you have never chosen me. Since you have not chosen me, then why should I pay so much to you? It will only waste my time. These words really made Sunian almost laugh. Especially seeing Lanmin's face look so bad. Although Sunian knew very well that Lee Baiken said this just for acting, she still felt a little happy. However, since Lee Baiken said so, it would be a pity if she didn't do something. Then he turned around and put his hands around his neck. Baiken, I knew you would be able to see me. After saying that, he slapped Lee Baiken on the face without hesitation. Hey, as long as I want to take advantage, I can take advantage in minutes. Such a move made Lanmin instantly blush. I immediately rushed over, trying to pull them apart. But how could Sunian let her succeed? He immediately blocked her and gave Lanmin a slap in the face without hesitation. Since Lee Baiken is so good at acting, if she is not better, she will not be able to match his acting skills. How could she lose to a badass male lead? And this heroine is funny, she actually looked at Lee Baiken immediately after being beaten. Lanmin, did you hear that? It was you who gave up on Baiken and didn't choose him. I told you at the beginning that you and Huo Linyuan are two sweethearts. It would not be possible for Baiken to be self-reliant, but what about you? You never. Sunian's mouth was covered by Lee Baiken before she could finish her words. Damn, this guy really went too far. He only acted for a short time and then he failed. Fortunately, I thought this guy was promising, his acting skills had improved, and it aroused my desire to perform. I worked on it for a long time, but my excitement was in vain. Lee Baiken. She is obviously too good at talking nonsense. Always talk about being self-reliant at night. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 223. Chapter 223 A Good Home. Lanmin was also surprised. But when she saw Lee Baiken covering Sunian's mouth, her eyes lit up again. She knew that Baiken would definitely not ignore her. Baiken is doing this all because of her. Lee Baiken leaned into Sunian's ear, stop talking nonsense. Sunian snorted in his heart. What nonsense, what does this straight man know? Why am I talking nonsense? This is obviously called precision strike. If you don't say it, don't say it. Lee Baiken, why does he think what Sunian said makes sense? Sunian, even if you get Baiken now, you won't be able to stay there forever. Lee Baiken also let go of Sunian. But I gnawed on the melon. This melon is mine. I ate it into my stomach. Who told you not to gnaw it? Now people outside are shouting about cherishing food. Even the children know it, but you don't know. It's not that you haven't completed 9 years of compulsory education. If you haven't, you can tell me directly and I might be kind enough to help you make arrangements. Sunian subconsciously walked towards Lan Min after saying this. But when she took a few steps, she realized that this guy Li Baikan was still holding her hand, and she subconsciously wanted to struggle away. However, the more Sunian struggled, the stronger Li Bei's efforts became. I even felt like my wrists were scratched red by this. Shit, this guy's strength is really too great. If I keep grabbing him like this, my hand will almost break. It's so slutty, my delicate hands are so slender. Li Baikan felt that at this time, the so-called plot could not be controlled. After all, Sunian doesn't believe that he is attracted to her. If he is controlled by the plot and does something to hurt Sunian, then their plot will become farther and farther away. But when he heard Sunian's cry of pain, he felt that he couldn't just go on like this. He immediately let go of Sunian's hand, wrapped her whole body in his arms, and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "I know you don't believe that I like you at all. Now I do this, do you believe it?" Sure enough, Sunian didn't struggle when he heard this. "You can do whatever you want to Lan Min, I just want to hold you like this, not because I'm afraid that you will hurt that woman Lan Min, but because I'm afraid that you think the person I care about is Lan Min, since you misunderstood me like this." Sunian really didn't expect Li Baikan to say that. "What can I do to Lan Min? Okay, since this guy said this, if I don't do something, then I'm sorry for this." Sunian raised her eyebrows slightly as she thought about this. "Hey, I am such a kind person. Even if you ruin the relationship between me and my husband, I still think about you. You say that I am such a kind person, will Baikan be unmoved?" "Yes," Li Baikan agreed. "Sunian, and you said before that the reason why you opposed me and Baikan was because you felt that Baikan didn't like me at all. Now that I have won your heart, Baikan, should you bless me and you, I think the big brother has found a good home." "Li Baikan. Why do I feel that the words good home are a bit strange?" Lan Min took a deep breath. She still didn't believe it. She didn't believe that Li Baikan would give up. Li Baikan must have done this for her body. It must be like this. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 224. Chapter 224 moved the whole country, I wouldn't watch it without him. Lan Min, what's wrong? Do you actually love Li Baikan? What you did before was just a matter of lust, but you didn't expect that by letting yourself indulge in lust, you actually killed Baikan because of lust. When Sunian said this, he sneered. And Lan Min, who had just felt slightly relieved, now felt a huge pain in his heart. She was also a little flustered. She thought she didn't love Li Baikan, but now she sees Li Baikan and Sunian together, but why does she feel so uncomfortable in her heart? Sunian quietly turned his head when he was talking, and sure enough he saw Li Baikan staring closely at Lan Min. "Hey, man, I know you are acting." Li Baikan looked at Lan Min. When Lan Min covered his chest, he thought of that day in the hospital. Lan Min felt uncomfortable and acted like he was about to die. Even though he was by Sunian's side, even though he was tightly with Sunian. Pasted together, but still controlled by the so-called plot. Finally started to be Lan Min's dog liquor. So when Lan Min felt uncomfortable, Li Baikan's heart was actually in his throat. He was really afraid that something like that would happen again, so Sunian, not to mention himself, felt that he was a fake person. But Li Baikan stared at Lan Min closely, but he didn't feel the so-called power. Why is that? Then Li Baikan watched the big beads of sweat appear on Lan Min's forehead little by little, and his face became more and more painful. At this time, Li Baikan suddenly had a bold idea. Then Li Baikan slowly let go of Sunian. Little by little. As he slowly let go, Li Baikan's heart became more and more nervous. But that power did not appear at all. Sunian also felt Li Baikan's reaction. Although Sunian knew that it was normal for Li Baikan to be like this, after all, seeing his beloved feel uncomfortable, coupled with Li Baikan's dog-licking personality. But for some reason, Sunian suddenly felt a sense of inexplicable loss in his heart. Why are you lost? When Li Baikan completely let go of Sunian, his heart reached a critical point. That plot actually didn't appear. Why is this happening? Li Baikan now felt like he had been hit by a big prize. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. At this moment, Lan Min's voice sounded again, I feel bad, Baikan. When Li Baikan heard this, I immediately looked over and said, what does it have to do with you being uncomfortable? These words shocked Lan Min again. Of course this also shocked Li Baikan, because even so, the power of the plot did not appear. What is this? Sunian, you feel uncomfortable. Do you think that when you say the words uncomfortable, then Baikan will have to walk in front of you and then serve you as you want? This is what you think of Baikan. Attitude, do you regard Baikan as a brother or as a dog? Although Li Baikan is indeed a licker. Li Baikan recovered his thoughts and then looked at Lan Men, I think I am indeed a dog in Lan Men's heart. Sunian. Wow, this, what is Li Baikan talking about? This licking dog is too willing to risk anything. I won't watch next year's National Touching Gala without him. It's really exciting. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 225. Chapter 225 Lan Min fainted again. It's not like this, Baikan, why do you think this, how can you be a dog? Lan Min covered his heart, in my heart, I have always regarded you as my eldest brother, even if we are not related by blood. Relationship, I also treat you as my elder brother. If you really regard me as your elder brother, is this how you treat your sister-in-law? These words completely left Lan Min speechless. She looked at Li Baikan in disbelief. Li Baikan felt disgusted when he was looked at like this. The last time he was in the hospital, this woman had such an expression, and then he lost control of his body. After losing control of her body, Sunian went to that club. Think of the scene I saw one day. Li Baikan felt very uncomfortable. In fact, Li Baikan really wants to do a lot of things to this woman now, but he is afraid of the plot. Even if the plot does not appear now, he should still be careful after previous experience. Because the lesson learned last time was really too profound. He is not afraid of something going wrong with him, but he is afraid of Sunian. What if something goes wrong with Sunian? For the sake of safety, he must do it step by step. Didn't this woman keep saying before that because she didn't recognize Sunian, what happened to her? Since this is the case, then he will approve it and show it to her. Sunian also echoed and said, yes, Baikan has recognized me now. Why are you still dawdling? Didn't you tell me before that what can you do without feelings? Forced melons are not sweet, but now I sweetened the melon, shouldn't you bless me? Sunian is really happy now. She had long been unhappy with the way the heroine kept talking about the supremacy of love. Now that she is using the heroine Sue's words to talk back, it feels really good. Why, in this situation, you don't call me sister-in-law, so tell me now, how can you call me sister-in-law? Tell me, so that I can work hard. After all, you were once my husband's sweetheart. Sunian deliberately emphasized the word once. The next moment, Lan Ren fainted. That's right, I fainted. Sunian? What the hell, what happened to this guy? Why did he faint? I haven't finished my play yet, why did he faint? This Mary Sue's female pig's feet are really too rough. Not to mention one such heroine, even 10 of them are no match for me. At this moment, several servants suddenly came and helped Lan Min up. Where are you going to take her? Sunian asked subconsciously. Throw it outside, Li Baikan's voice sounded from behind. Throw it outside? Sunian turned around after hearing this and looked at Li Baikan in disbelief. Although I know that this guy is acting, but this guy's acting is too exaggerated, so he just throws it out like this? Under Sunian's shocked eyes, Li Baikan walked up to him. Sunian, you may not believe it. I was really like a puppet before, thinking that getting along with Lan Min was love, but when I met after you, I feel like I've found myself. When I'm with you, I can't help but pay attention to you. Maybe that's just because I like you. Indeed, my current behavior is a bit too abrupt, but I believe that time can prove everything. After saying this, Li Baikan turned and left. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 226. Chapter 226, Why does it feel like I'm drawing a cake? Are you a little tired of liking someone, so you also want to taste what it feels like to be liked? When Sunian finished speaking, I was surprised. How could she say such a thing? And he said such words without any awareness. The reason why Li Baikan left was because he wanted to find a quiet place to sort out the current situation so that he could decide what to do next. But when he heard this, he stopped. At this moment, Li Baikan wanted to say a lot. I want to tell Sunian that he was not himself before, and tell her completely that he was controlled by the plot before. But he didn't say it. He sighed deeply, then turned around and walked up to Sunian again. Don't you know what you did? Sunian? Sunian looked at the man in front of him. What does this mean? Why does it feel like I did something terrible to him? Damn it, I don't look like a serious person. You pester me every day and then say those words in front of me. I'm not a dead person. How could I not have any reaction? Sunian blinked. This excuse is really bad. Can't this licking dog think of a good excuse? It would be better to say that you are sexually interested in me, Tesk. You don't believe it. When Li Baikan said this, he took a step closer to Sunian again. The two were very close at the moment. You have done so many things to me, and now I do what you want. Well, if you don't believe it, Sunian, don't you think you are a bit irresponsible? Sunian, why do I feel like a scumbag under Li Baikan's eyes? But, how could I think so? You don't want to be responsible? Then let's go find Dad now and reason with him. After Li Baikan said this, he directly held his hand. Let Dad see how irresponsible his good daughter-in-law is. Responsible, I will definitely be responsible. Sunian saw Li Baikan's attitude and said quickly, Baikan, you misunderstood. It's not that I don't want to be responsible. I'm just too happy. I really didn't think of you. You actually like me. Do you know how to worry about gains and losses? I always feel like you are lying to me, and I have no sense of security at all. Damn, I actually moved the old man out. Fortunately, this girl has a quick mind. But at this moment, Sunian suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and then he sighed. As you just said, you and Lan Min have no practical relationship, and now we have no practical relationship either. Relationship? Practical relationship? What kind of practical relationship do you want? Sunian quickly acted shy. Ha ha ha, you are such a licking dog. Let me see how you act next. Hee, what you said is so nice. If you have the ability, just have a practical relationship with me, just a little bit. Do you love me as a person or my body? Sunian almost broke the law on the spot when he heard this. This guy actually said it directly. What should I do? If I love him as a person, what should I do if it becomes more difficult for me to get close to his body in the future? If I'm honest, maybe this guy could fall out with me on the spot. Of course it's your person, what else could Sunian do but say this? Since you love me and don't care about actual sexual relations, as long as the relationship between the two of us is in place, then it will happen naturally. Sunian looked up when he heard this. Seeing Lee Baiken's serious expression, she couldn't help but think. Why does it feel wrong? Is this guy drawing cakes for me? End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 227. Chapter 227. Disbanding the medical team prepared for Lan Min. Lee Baiken returned to the study. Then turn on monitoring. Immediately, I saw Lu Jing appear and take away Lan Ren, who was thrown out. This laner is finally of some use. I estimate that Lu Jing will be more obedient in the future. Zhou Su came soon. It turned out that Lan Min bribed a servant, and then came in under the cover of that servant. But this behavior can be regarded as a reminder to Lee Baiken, letting Lee Baiken know that there are still many loopholes in what he thought was foolproof. Zhou Su, who was standing next to him, was also trembling a little. If he still can't see that Lee Baiken plans to completely break up with Lan Min, then all these years of his life have been in vain. However, Zhou Su couldn't help but sigh. This man's heart has also become fast enough. Zhou Su, please change all the people. Zhou Su, okay, Mr. Li. You should check the background carefully this time. I don't want this situation to happen again. Do you understand what I mean? Zhou Su felt invisible pressure when he heard this. I understand, what happened this time will definitely not happen again. Zhou Su then reported some other things before leaving. Lee Baiken fell into deep thought when he was alone in the study. Why on earth, that mysterious power didn't appear today? Have you left the plot? When did it break away from the plot? Lee Baiken felt that he had to figure this out so that he could know what to do next. He has his eyes closed. The events of the past few days appeared in his mind bit by bit. Lee Baiken opened his eyes when he thought about the day Huo Linyuan was going to take Sunian away. The reason for this was that he thought of how he felt that power was leaving his body at that time. Could it be? When he thought of this, Lee Baiken subconsciously clenched his hands into fists. Even so, Lee Baiken knew very well that he could not take it too lightly. Things can't be that simple. Then Lee Baiken began to give instructions on various things. Soon Lee Baiken got the news. Lu Jing was ambushed by Huo Linyuan while taking Lan Ren away. Lan Ren was also taken away, and Lu Jing was also seriously injured. Lee Baiken had no reaction to the news. After all, he was not the one who was injured. But at this time, Lee Baiken remembered another important thing. Cancel the surgeries of Lan Min and Sunian, and disband the medical team at the same time. Zhou Su was completely surprised when he heard this. You have to know that as someone who has been with Lee Baiken, he knows very well how much effort Lee Baiken put into building this top medical team for Lan Min, and now it is just disbanded. Zhou Su knew that with the high salary offered by the Lee Group, all he had to do was obey all Lee Baiken's orders, but now he still couldn't help but ask Zhou Su, Mr. Lee, do you really want to cancel? Lee Baiken understood what Zhou Su meant. Seeing Zhou Su's appearance, Lee Baiken felt that he had to give Zhou Su a perfect explanation. After all, Zhou Su had been his confidant for so many years, so Lee Baiken cleared his throat. What are you doing if you don't cancel? Are you just being taken care of by that woman like this? Is it possible to use it when you call it? Zhou Su was completely shocked by these words, and he even forgot his sense of propriety, so he subconsciously said what was in his heart, Mr. Lee, are you finally awake? End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Which John Word. Chapter 228. Chapter 228, Bystanders are clear, authorities are confused. Although Lee Baikin admitted that what he did before was a bit too, like, Josu's behavior was probably a bit too straightforward. Did you think so too before? Josu also realized that he had accidentally spoken out what was on his mind. He quickly lowered his head. After all, if you say bad things about your boss, do you still want to live? Josu, you have been with me for so long, you can be said to be my confidant. If you don't tell the truth to me, then no one will tell the truth to me. After saying this, Lee Baikin said, sighing deeply, it is said that those in authority are confused, but those on the lookout know clearly, so I want to ask what you mean. Hearing this, Josu slowly raised his head. Josu looked at Lee Baikin and suddenly felt that Lee Baikin was a little weird. No, he had been a little weird during this period. Even Josu, who had been with Lee Baikin for so many years, didn't know what to say at this moment. What, Josu, don't you believe me? Josu thought for a while and then said, Mr. Lee, you can listen if you want, but I hope you won't be angry after listening to it. You just think I'm talking nonsense. When Josu saw Lee Baikin nodding, he continued, I have been with you for so many years, and I have watched your dedication to Miss Lan, but I really feel that Miss Lan is not worth it. You have done so much. Even sometimes, I feel that if I were a woman, I would be moved by the things you did, but Miss Lan would not hesitate to throw herself into Huo Linyuan's arms when she turned around. Actually, Josu really had a problem with Lan Min. But Josu felt that it might be because he was different from Lee Baikin, and he might not see the good qualities of Lan Mi, and he was saying that he was nothing more than a subordinate. Just do whatever the boss asks him to do. After Josu finished speaking, he looked at Lee Baikin cautiously. After all, even if the boss said that he wanted to hear the truth, he never said it. He would not deal with you after hearing the truth. And looking at Lee Baikin like this, why does he feel that his current mood is not very good? Now Josu really feels a little regretful. Josu guessed correctly this time. Lee Baikin was really in a bad mood at the moment, but Lee Baikin was in a bad mood not because of what Josu said. Why can Josu, as a person around him, think so? Why is Josu not controlled by this plot like him? The more he thought about it, the worse Lee Baikin felt. However, he still said to Josu, who was shivering, my mind was confused before, so I did such a thing. I will never do such a thing again in the future. In addition, you did it because of my confusion. You are tired of a lot of non-professional work. In this case, I will notify the finance department to give you a 2-point salary increase. 2 points of wages. Josu, who originally expected to be greeted by Lee Baikin's anger, heard this and his eyes immediately lit up. He just said it. How could his boss be an ordinary boss? Of course, Josu, who had received the benefit, had to say something nice, and then he said with a smile, actually, I think the young mistress is much better than Miss Lan. The young mistress is not only a good character and beautiful person, but also a good cook. Vegetable. A table of good food. When Lee Baikin heard this, he thought that the food Sunian cooked before was, well, really good. I remember a few months ago, my wife had a table of delicious food at home. You had something to do at the time and couldn't go back, so you ordered me to explain to my wife. Not only was my wife not angry, but she even dragged me to eat together. When he mentioned this, Josu couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Hey, madam, that craftsmanship is really comparable to that of a 5-star chef. Sunian, if you flatter me, you flatter me. Why do you want to betray me? Hee, I know that the wallets of all the bosses must have gone down, so I will increase the amount of 4,000 tomorrow to reduce the burden on the wallets of all the bosses. Look, I feel so sorry for you all. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Witch John Word. Chapter 229. Chapter 229. But she is uneducated and can only get around the world by saying hum. After Josu finished speaking, he looked at Lee Baiken. At this time, he realized that Lee Baiken's face couldn't look any more ugly. Josu, why did Mr. Lee's complexion change so quickly, just like a woman's? The reason why Lee Baiken is ugly is because the food he eats is as unpalatable as Sunian deliberately made. The slightly better food is the porridge from those days. It's Josu. Well, Mr. Lee, do you have any other instructions? If you don't have any instructions, then I'll leave. I remember there are still a few documents that I haven't given you. Lee Baiken nodded. Soon, Josu disappeared as quickly as possible. After all, Mr. Lee's expression is so unfathomable, it would be better to disappear as soon as possible. Lee Baiken was left alone, as if he was thinking about something. Sunian sneezed several times in the room. She rubbed her nose. I couldn't help but mutter, "What's wrong? Is someone talking bad about me behind my back?" After saying this, Sunian smiled. Just continue to look at the phone and send warmth to the male anchor. Ever since Lee Baiken gave her money, she suddenly became the richest woman on the live broadcast platform, sending warmth everywhere, giving some warmth to those poor boys, letting them know what it means to have true love in the world. However, Sunian still played tricks and usually transferred money from Lee Baiken's card to her card. This way Lee Baiken won't find out that she used his money to give her warmth. Sunian guessed that it was time to eat, so he put away his mobile phone and went out to eat. Arrived at the restaurant. She looked at the servant and felt something was wrong, but she couldn't tell specifically what was wrong. Anyway, there was something strange. When she sat at the dining table, she said casually, "Where's Baiken? Is he unable to eat because he has something to do? It would be better if Lee Baiken had something to do." After all, when Lee Baiken was around, Sunian always had to worry about face and pretend. She acted like a lady, but she didn't feel comfortable at all while eating. She is more comfortable when eating alone. But this time, unlike when Lee Baiken was not at home, the servant walked up to her and explained where Lee Baiken was going, and asked her to eat alone. On the contrary, his expression is a bit strange. It is a kind of strange thing. This kind of strangeness is also accompanied by a crisis. It turns out that a woman's sixth sense is very accurate. Sure enough, it didn't take long before she saw Lee Baiken wearing an apron and serving food in front of her. Sunian really didn't know what to say. However, she is uneducated and can only get around the world by saying F***ck. Baiken, this is. Lee Baiken put the food on the table and said calmly under Sunian's gaze, "I made it." Sunian. What's going on? I didn't wake up. I've watched my little brother's live broadcast too much, and I've seen hallucinations. Who can tell me what is going on and why Lee Baiken is cooking? What's wrong? Is something wrong? Lee Baiken sat next to Sunian. He was not surprised by Sunian's shock, but what does it mean to watch the little brother's live broadcast? Is this woman still watching those crooked men? Do you think I am cheating? It's just a meal prepared by a servant. And then I brought it to you to lie to you. When he said this, Lee Baiken paused slightly. Does it make sense if I do this? End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Witch John Word. Chapter 230. Chapter 230 MD, does this guy want to kill me? For some reason, Sunian felt that the temperature in the room had dropped a few degrees. But Sunian was a little unconvinced. Can you blame me? After all, the setting of dog licking is a domineering president. How can a domineering president know how to cook? If a few steps indicate that a domineering president can cook, then how could a domineering president cook for me, a vicious female partner? Look, the look in this guy's eyes, if you didn't know better, you would think I had done something sorry for him. Sunian snorted coldly in his heart. But on the face, he said extremely happily, I'm just too surprised, because I didn't even dare to dream about you cooking for me in Baikan before. Now I'm really so happy, I don't know for a moment how to express my feelings. Lee Baikan reached out and gave Sunian a chopstick to eat. I just think there must be a couple who can cook. If you are not good at cooking, then I will do it. Sunian. Even if the chef does a good job, it still doesn't feel like home. Lee Baikan looked at Sunian. Is this guy pointing at me? Are you humiliating me? What do you mean by not being good at cooking? I'm very good at cooking, but I just don't want to give it to you, a bitch. Of course, Lee Baikan didn't want to humiliate Sunian, but he felt that instead of saying some sweet words, why not do something, so that Sunian could understand that he was sincere and not here with her because of that Lan Min acting. Seeing that Sunian didn't move his chopsticks, Lee Baikan could only make a big move. It's better now that there are only two of us, but in the future we will have children. After the children go to school, they will write essays and talk about the smell of home. Do you want him to write about the food cooked by the nanny? Sure enough, when Sunian heard this, his eyes immediately lit up. Child. Lee Baikan admitted that it was a bit uncomfortable to talk about things with children. But he felt that as long as it was the beginning, it would be good. Child, this guy actually gave me a child, ha ha ha, I finally found a chance. Yes, I have been serving the food cooked by the chef since I was a child. Although the food cooked by the chef is delicious, it always feels like it lacks the taste of home. Baikan, what you said is really right. If we have a child, then you must be a good father, and our child must be the happiest child in the world. Sunian said this and picked up the chopsticks. When Lee Baikan heard this, he remembered the dream he had before. The person in the dream who looked somewhat similar to him said that she lied to him. At this moment, Sunian's body seemed to have pressed the pause button. After a while, Sunian swallowed silently, and a bright smile appeared on his face. It's delicious, it's delicious. This is the most delicious meal I have ever eaten. It made me deeply feel the warmth of family. The brilliance of human nature. Although our life is different from ordinary family life, I am sure that our children in the future will definitely feel the warmth of family. Fortunately, this licking dog died early, otherwise, my calligraphy treasure would have suffered a loss. Fortunately. Lee Baikan. This guy is really amazing. People usually cook without distinguishing between sugar and salt, but he actually doesn't distinguish between alkali and salt. Make mapo tofu, pour almost half a bowl of alkali. Damn, is this guy trying to kill me? Lee Baikan carefully recalled that he seemed to have followed the tutorial and made a mistake in that step. End of this chapter.